Our second program presenter this morning is a colleague in the Capital Area Texas Master Naturalist Chapter, Sarah Coles. She has over 15 years experience in educational activity, but most importantly, her passion is seeing children and families spending time in nature. As the executive director of the Texas Children in Nature Network, she is going to tell us about her passion, the mission of Texas Children in Nature, and her work with Texas partners to ensure equitable access and connection to nature for Texas youngsters, including two activities: Cities Connecting Children to Nature and the Outdoor Learning Environment. And so please welcome Sarah.
Hello, everyone. As Clarence said, my name is Sarah Coles. I use she, her pronouns. I am the executive director of the Texas Children in Nature Network. I am based out of Austin and therefore work out of the ancestral and unceded land of the Comanche, Tonkawa, and Sana people. I'm really excited to speak to you today a bit about what we do at Texas Children in Nature, and I'm going to see if I can share my screen here and get my presentation started. There we go. So at Texas Children in Nature Network, our mission is to ensure equitable access and connection to nature for all children in Texas. Our vision is to have a Texas where children and families from all walks of life will spend more time outdoors, engaging with nature for healthier, happier, and smarter Texas. So I thought I'd start with, let's see if I can share my sound as well. I'm going to try to share a video. If it doesn't work, let me know. You all hear that?
No, we're not able to hear this. Sarah, would you stop sharing for a minute and then start over a minute? Okay. Now, when you click on the share, and when you do, there are two little check marks that you need to make on the first share screen before it.
There we go.
To prefer to play on the iPad instead of ever reading or doing schoolwork. He turns into a beast and is hangry and mad, and the other one is disconnected from the family.
5 more minutes of screen time.
The teachers have mentioned that they are worried about the kids being on screen too much.
Texas has 10% of America's K-12 population. That's about 7 million kids. Most of them log about 50 hours a week of screen time, and about a third of those students are overweight or obese. Bottom line, there's a critical disconnect between Texas youth and the outdoors. Helping solve this problem and creating the next generation of nature-minded citizens is what Texas Children in Nature does. Thousands of organizations working across Texas to create access to nature and nature-based programming. TCINN partners with over 500 organizations ranging from health to education, community development, and conservation. These all form a collaborative network that drives efficiencies in providing better access to resources, nature-based programming, and best practices. It's a great support system for organizations and educators all across Texas.
On an annual basis, probably around 10,000 children come through the Wildflower Center, and our goal for them is to see that flower bloom, see a cricket hop, to experience nature, have their aha moments, and eventually become that next generation of stewards of nature. Texas Children in Nature helps bring all of the organizations that work with children and nature and brings us all together. Without Texas Children in Nature, we wouldn't be connected with other organizations in our community, in the state, and national.
As someone who has spent many years in the classroom, I can tell you that TCINN's network is so important, especially when it comes to resource equity. Not every region has the same access to materials and best practices. Most teachers don't even know where to start when it comes to building a green space or a natural play environment.
Texas Children in Nature helps prepare the next generation of conservation-minded Texans by working through creating a love of nature.
When we go outside, what I notice is that the kids are inquisitive. They talk to us. We actually have a conversation with them and they listen to us and they want to learn, which is pretty amazing.
And by creating a love for nature in our children, we're creating adults who care about the nature around us.
We're able to live really close to the Greenbelt, and that's really a big part of our lives. We come home and it just seems like we get along a whole lot better. They're just different. It's just, they're good people.
Imagine a Texas where all 7 million kids go outside every day. They have access to green spaces, they get to play in nature, and they get to experience the outdoors. And maybe they learn to be caretakers of nature as they grow into adulthood. This is our mission at Texas Children in Nature.
So that's just a little bit about what we do, to give you a little bit of background for any of you who haven't worked with us in the past. So why do we work on trying to get more kids outdoors? We do this because we know that children who spend time outdoors are healthier physically and mentally. They do better in school, have higher self-esteem, have good self-discipline, feel more capable and confident, are good problem solvers, are more cooperative with others, are more creative, feel more connected to nature, and are tomorrow's conservation leaders. And on our website, we have lots of studies to back up all of these findings that we have. So a little bit of our history. So Texas Children in Nature Network started in 2009 with Senate Bill 205. So this was a Texas state legislature resolution that resolved to address the problem of nature deficit disorder. If you're not familiar with that term, it's a term that was coined by Richard Louv in his book, Last Child in the Woods. And it's basically stating that kids today are not spending as much time outdoors as they did even a generation ago. And that our kids are seeing some negative side effects of not spending time outdoors. And so to combat this, they charged both Texas Parks and Wildlife and the Texas Education Association to come up with some sort of solution. And so out of that, a group of leaders from across the state were brought together in 2010, and Texas Children in Nature was born. And the goal of the organization was to connect all of the nature organizations across the state with both health providers and educators and community leaders to build a network that would work towards getting more kids outside. So we are just a little over 10 years in now. So for the first 10 years of TCINN's life, we were a program under Texas Parks and Wildlife, and we're incubated under that program. But in January of this year, Texas Children in Nature Network became an independent nonprofit. We do have a memorandum of understanding with Texas Parks and Wildlife as a founding partner. And I still actually office out of headquarters in Austin. So we at Texas Children in Nature Network work off of what's called the collective impact model. And this means that we are all about collaboration. We have 4 main things that we work in. First is that we have a common agenda. All of our partners from all across the state are working towards one goal, getting children and families outdoors. And we do that through a variety of ways. The way that Texas Parks and Wildlife does that is different than how the Houston Zoo does it, is different than how Lubbock Landmark does that. But we all are working towards getting more kids outdoors. And with that, our regional collaboratives meet with that goal in mind. We have mutually reinforcing activities. That means that we work together to work towards that same goal. So things like outreaches, programming, sharing resources that all of our partners have come up with. One big resource I've been working with one of our partners on is a guide on how to build a nature playground, similar to what you saw the kids playing with in the video. And that's going to be a resource that can be shared all across the state for all the other organizations that are interested in that. We also have monthly webinars that we hold every month that are a great way to learn about things that are happening, not just in the state, but across the country. And we have a wide variety of topics within our webinars. The one we just had last night was with a psychiatrist who specializes in nature interventions. And she was really talking about how to use nature every day to create a mental health plan for yourself, and how you can work within your organizations to introduce that to families, that they are able to put that positive practice into place in their families as well. Another big piece is continuous communication. We have newsletters that we send out that share information from all over the state, what everyone's doing. We have social media. Share what our partners are doing a lot on all of our social media channels, and that includes our Facebook, our LinkedIn, our Instagram, and our Twitter, and now our YouTube channel. But it all comes down to having a strong backbone organization, and that's us at Texas Children in Nature Network. So we also work with this idea of systems change. And so in systems change, we're all trying to move one thing. So that's what's down here in the mental model. And our one thing we're trying to change is children need to spend more time in nature. And so with that, we are looking at all of these higher things that flow down into how kids spend time in nature. So the first thing we look at are like, what are those relationships that we can have with each other and that influence kids' lives? So we work with educators, nature professionals, and health professionals, doing all sorts of networking and working together and creating partnerships. We also think about power dynamics. Y'all were just talking about that with the CCCA group, but who are the decision makers and who's in the room? Who's not in the room? Who should be in the room? Then we take it up another level and we look at policies. And so what laws are in place? One of the big things that we are working on is outdoor time during school day. We're seeing a lot more schools are taking more time outdoors with COVID. We're seeing a lot of schools do outdoor lunches now, but that would be something that we would love to see in place even after some of these COVID protocols are taken down. It's just a great time for kids to be able to spend time outdoors while they eat their lunch. Wouldn't we all love to be able to eat our lunch outdoors every day? Then also things like recess time. There are rules that just say that kids have to be outdoors for a certain amount of time, but it doesn't necessarily say it has to be recess. And so you'll see schools counting the PE time as that outdoor time because they were on the track. Well, walking around the track doesn't have the same nature benefit as spending time under a tree or getting to build a fort or any of those great things that kids can do. Then we also think about the practices. So these are things that we think about like, well, we've always done it this way. Well, maybe just because we've always done it that way isn't always the best way to do it. So thinking through what are those practices that influence our thinking and influence the way kids are spending time outdoors. And lastly, we have to think about resources and what resources are available. And this can be things like funding and grants, but also can be time. What time is available to do these things? I think one of the big things we've all learned with COVID is how overly scheduled we have been in our family lives. So as I said, we have 8 regional collaboratives across the state. We are working to grow and fill in some of these gray spots. So if you're in one of those gray spots, just be patient. We're working on it. We know that these gray spots exist. But we work in, this is our Caprock region, then our North Texas region, Piney Woods region, Austin, San Antonio, Rio Grande Valley, Coastal Bend, and the Houston-Galveston area. And these all have regional collaboratives and they have regional leaders. Texas Children in Nature could not do this work without our wonderful regional leaders across the state. And these are people who are in those communities and working very closely with those partners that are in those regions to create a network and to create partnerships and to really move our mission forward. So if you are interested in joining any of these regional collaboratives, I'll have my contact information at the end. Please let me know and I can put you in touch with those regional leaders. These regional collaboratives also meet at least quarterly. Some do quarterly, some do every other month, some do monthly. Every region's a little bit different in what they like to do, but they meet together. Since March of 2020, all of these meetings have been virtual. Some are starting to move back into in-person meetings, but some of these regions have decided, hey, you know what? We are a huge area. It's really hard to get from Galveston to Katy in an afternoon. And so we are going to continue to meet virtually and maybe meet in person a couple times a year for social events, but for the most part, meet virtually because it's actually a lot easier for our partners to do it that way. So I talked about our regional collaboratives. So that for me, I kind of think about that as being the kind of horizontal way that we work. We also work vertically within our strategic areas of interest. With that, we have equity in the center of everything we do. We know that a lot of cities have disinvested in their communities of color. There aren't parks built there. There is not easy access to park land. A lot of times you have to have a car to be able to get to parks in a city. And so we really think about equity in everything that we do. But then we also think about the other ways that we work and how that feeds into equity. So we work with health professionals, we work with educators, we work within access. So what are those places that are natural spaces that are available to people? In Texas, we only have 5% public land. We are one of the smallest percentages of any state in the United States. And so any of you who have ever visited a state park or a national park in the state can probably tell you, you know what, there's a lot of people there. They're full. And we know that we have a lot of people and not a lot of green space. And so we were working on some really creative ideas to increase that green space availability. We work in communities. We know that yes, health professionals and educators have a lot to do with how families interact in their day-to-day lives, but there's also a third group that have a lot to do with how families are raising their kids. These are groups like scouts, spiritual groups, even just your homeowners association. These are all community type groups that we work with. We work within our network to build the network and to build leadership across the network as well. I know that I will not always be around, and there needs to be someone who can take my place at TCINN when I leave. And so we work on creating that leadership network across the network as well. We work within policy. This is new for us. As Texas Parks and Wildlife, we were not allowed to work in the policy realm in terms of we couldn't do any advocating, we couldn't do any lobbying. Because we were a state agency. We're now a nonprofit, and so we can have those conversations with our elected leaders and say, hey, you know, I really feel like we need to have more green space available for schools. Things like, hey, you know, it would be great if the TEA could amend their policies on the amount of time that students spend outdoors. And then lastly, we work in the marketing field. I know that might seem a little weird, but really this is how we talk to people about nature and how we spread the news to families that, hey, you know what? It's really good for your family to spend time outside every day, and this is how you can do it. So here are some of our strategic goals. In 2021, when we became our new nonprofit, we also released a brand new strategic plan. And so these are some of our goals for this year. For network, we want to leverage the power of our diverse network and amplify impact. Access to nature, we want to increase the number of welcoming natural spaces accessible for all children. Education, we want to inspire educators to use outdoor classrooms and nature-based learning. Health, we want to engage the health community to use nature as a health strategy. community, encourage nature-based experiences through community organizations. Policy, advocate and promote state, regional, and municipal level planning, policies, and funding to support outdoor play and learning. And marketing, raise awareness of and increase engagement in nature through a consistent communication strategy. So here's what you all came for, some of our big projects. So the first is our Olay Texas project. So Olay stands for Outdoor Learning Environments. This is something that we work with our smallest Texans. So it's a statewide initiative to work within early childcare centers to increase the amount of outdoor time our students spend. So there are about 17,000 kids right now in Texas that are in early childcare center environments. Of those kids, it is mandated that they spend 60 minutes outdoors every day, but it doesn't really say what that means. And it doesn't say what those spaces should look like. So what you're seeing on the screen here is a great example of an outdoor space at the San Antonio Zoo School. However, what you'll see in a lot of places is some blacktop with a plastic playground set on top of it, and that is their outdoor space. And it's just not a very engaging space for kids. And we also know that kids that are in a space like this are able to, they move around a lot more, they're a lot more active, and they're engaging with the nature around them. And this really came to light in a study that the Department of State Health Services did, where they learned that 1 in 5 kids under the age of 5 are already considered obese. And they're like, okay, we need to figure out a way to get kids more active when we can. So one of the things that they looked at was some research that was coming out of North Carolina that was showing that students who were in these natural spaces were 20% more active than they were in other outdoor spaces. And they're like, okay, this looks like a place that we can really dig in. And while they started doing that digging in, they connected with Texas Children in Nature, Texas Parks and Wildlife, Texas Tech, AgriLife, and the Texas Association for the Education of Young Children, and really started to work together to form what became the Olay Texas. Since then, we have 5 pilot cities across the state: Lubbock, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, and Houston. And we're working in those cities to pilot the first few of these Olay sites so that we have a model that we can share with early childcare centers all across the state. And this model is not just what this site will look like, but what a smaller site will look like. And I am going to click on this link here and show you one of those smaller sites. So this is Covenant Child Development Center in Lubbock, Texas. And as you'll see as I kind of click through here, this is not a huge space like you were seeing with the San Antonio Zoo School. We're just in this little kind of alleyway on the side of the building. But what we've put in place are planter gardens, a looping pathway, trees, chances for the students to really engage in nature in not a huge space. And so that comes back to what we call our Olay best practices. So what we have in here are lots of different learning settings, a looping pathway, some place where they can just run around, vegetable gardens, trees, flowering plants, places where pollinators are coming. All of that is included in our Olay best practices. And one of the big things that we have worked on this year is a child-friendly plant list. So this is a flyer that Texas Parks and Wildlife, the Texas Landscape and Nursery Association, and the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center have put together. That's a guide for child-safe plants that they can use. These are plants that kids can interact with on a regular basis, and the vast majority of them are natives. Because it is the Wildflower Center and TPWD putting it together, they have really looked at what those native plants are. For instance, we all know that we're not going to put a huisache tree where there's a bunch of little kids because they have thorns. But there are some great trees that can be put in those spaces that kids can interact with every day, things that have lots of good texture, lots of good smells that students can play with. Our next big initiative is the city's Connecting Children to Nature. So this is a co-project with ourselves, our larger network, which is the Children in Nature Network, that's a national group, and then also the National League of Cities. And the National League of Cities, if you're not familiar with who they are considered the #1 professional development organization for city leadership. So they work with mayors from all over the country, city councils, groups like that. And so these groups got together in 2015 and thought, you know what, we really need to come up with a way that we can put nature into the infrastructure of cities. So it's not just the Parks and Rec department that is taking on the main burden of this work, but it's every city department, transportation, stormwater, the libraries. All of these groups are working together. So there are 40 cities all across the country that are taking part in CCCN initiatives. We just added a whole new group, but of that, 3 of those cities are in Texas, and those cities are San Antonio, Austin, and Houston. And so we work with those mayors' offices to really think about how we can put nature into the everyday for families in those cities. So within that, we have 7 core strategies that we work with within the state of Texas. The first is green schoolyards. And so that's really taking that Olay concept, but scaling it up to middle, elementary, and high school students. Here you can see some examples of some schools in Austin that we've been putting this in at. What you see here is that looping pathway, just like we had in the other group. But we're working with stormwater to put in stormwater collection, and then also that's rainwater that we can use to water all of these new native plants that we've put in place. We've got lots of good places to run around, explore nature, and really interact with the nature around us. We've also incorporated that Olay Texas into this strategy as well. One of our big wins for that has been the city of Austin put in a city ordinance that they need to provide childcare centers for every city employee. And all of those sites that they are building are going to be Olay Texas sites. But that's something that we couldn't have had in place if it hadn't been for our CCCN project. Nature smart libraries. So we know that lots of families go to the library, and you go to the library not just to get books, but to spend time with community members. Lots of our libraries have lots of cool programming that they do all of the time. So working with our librarians in creating that programming, also working with our librarians to create nice green spaces where families can maybe read the books that they've just checked out in nature. And then another really exciting project we're working with our Nature Smart libraries on are things called story walks. I don't know if any of you have been able to see this. It's starting to pop up all over the state at libraries. And these are opportunities where we have these looping pathways where we put signs out with children's books on them. And so you're able to take a walk and read a book while you're taking your walk. So you're able to be active, be out in nature, and then read a book at the same time. We work at recreation centers to add more green space. We know that when you are exercising, green exercise or exercising outdoors is actually better for you and better for your heart than exercising inside a gym. I heard the statistic last year, right when everyone was not going to the gym anymore, that they were learning that working out outside is actually almost twice as good for your heart as working out in the gym. So all of you who are outdoors gardening and weeding, it's actually really good for your heart. So keep doing it. And lastly, we work with nature play. So that's putting things like fort builds, loose parts around, and then loose youth development is working with our high school and college age students to get them involved in this work as well. They start learning things like invasives removal, water quality testing, how to build things like these nature playgrounds. And these are really good skills that they can take as they move on in their careers, either moving into a green career themselves or taking that knowledge with them as they enter workforce in other places where now they're conservation minded, maybe they're a lawyer that has been part of this youth development, and they're like, okay, so I really want to work with groups like the CCCA to have those conservation easements come into place. Not necessarily a green career, but they've taken this foundation that they've gotten through this youth development into their future career as well. I also wanted to touch on our Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights. We've passed this already in Austin, hoping to pass it in some other communities as well. And so we worked with the City Council to come up with this list. And we believe in a world where every child has the right to climb a tree, catch a fish, picnic in a park, hike a trail, ride a bike, splash in a creek or river, discover plants and wildlife, play in the sand or mud, gaze at the night sky, chase a firefly, plant a seed and watch it grow, harvest and eat a fruit or vegetable. So another big project we've been working on has been our top places to spend time in nature document. So this is a document that we started putting together this spring. We have gotten a lot of requests from public health professionals and doctors, specifically pediatricians. They are starting to prescribe nature more often. So if any of you have heard about it, it's called the Park RX program. So basically they're seeing families where they are identifying things that can be easily addressed by spending time in nature. Going back to obesity, but also attention deficit disorder, anxiety, all of these things pediatricians are starting to see more and more often in their practices. And they know that having families spend more time in nature with their kids is a great way to combat that. So actually what they're doing is starting to tell families, hey, I'm gonna write you a prescription to spend this much time per week at a park. Families then are like, yeah, so how do I do that? And so they came to us and like, hey, it'd be great if we had some sort of document that we could give them along with that prescription. So what we've done is we actually got a grant through Austin Public Health to kind of pilot this and see how we were going to create this document. And now we have a template that we can use across the state as well. So we looked at a kind of some variety of things while we were making a template of these places that you can go. First, we thought about transportation. How are families going to get there? Thinking about back to where I talked about earlier, a lot of times our parks are only available by car. So everything that's on this list is easily accessible either by public or active transportation. So you'll see on this, we even put what bus routes take you to those places, so that you could learn, you wouldn't have to go and do a ton of research. We also worked with a group called Gisello. They are a bike organization in Austin here, and they actually created an interactive map where you can put in your address and the park you're wanting to go to, and it'll map out how you get there. So make it really easy for families to get to these parks. We also thought about the cost. A lot of our city parks are free, but a lot of other nature spaces aren't. And so we put everything on here that was either free or had a reduced cost pass available for families. So either through a library checkout system, a lot of our nature sites take EBT cards. So the food stamp card that families get, you can use that to get a reduced price at these sites. That's a program that a lot of people don't know exists, but it actually does. And so we have things like that available to them on there. Then we also thought about, are there a variety of activities that can be done in these nature spaces? For some of us, walking on a trail is the height of what we could do. Is very exciting for us. It's what we really like to do. But when you're 5, that's not always as exciting as it might be to an adult. And so we have lots of different ideas on there, different things you can do in each of these spaces. We also tried to include if there were picnic or barbecue areas available in those spaces, because we know being able to sit down and have a snack is really important for a lot of our families as well. And lastly, for any of you who have ever had young children, know that this last one is a very important category in our rubric. All of our sites have a restroom available. So we know that when you get to someplace with a little kid, they're going to tell you they need to go to the bathroom. And so we put on there that all of these spaces do have a restroom available. Our next city that we're going to tackle for this is going to be Corpus Christi, because it was actually the pediatricians in Corpus who came to us first with this request. And this flyer is available for Austin, and it's available in both English and Spanish. Next up, we have our Texas Nature Challenge. So this is a partnership with ourselves, Texan by Nature, and the Texas Forest Service. And it's kind of like a scavenger hunt. So going back to families being told they need to spend time outside and being like, okay, so what do I do next? And a lot of times families will tell us, hey, I really do want to go to the park, but I don't even know what to do when I get there, because we have parents now who are raised not having gone outside. So it's a new concept for them. They're not really sure what they're going to be doing. So that's where the Nature Challenge comes in. It's kind of a scavenger hunt that you can do all across the state. So there are both place-based challenges. So you go specifically to the Jones State Forest and you do an activity. Or there's also some that are just brought. So a lot of the ones that we have put on there as Texas Children Nature are our family nature walks. And so these are prompts that families can participate in that you don't have to have a ton of scientific knowledge to participate in. So for instance, today is blue. So find something blue. So most families will be able to kind of be like, okay, we're just looking for something blue. You don't necessarily have to know that that's this animal or this flower or this plant, but it's a way to start a conversation with families and get kids excited to be out on the trail looking for things. I kind of touched on this. We do have our webinars that we offer. So our webinars are shared on our YouTube channel. I don't know what happened to my image, I'm sorry. But we do share all of our webinars on our YouTube channel the day after that we have recorded them. So all of our past ones are up there. The one that we recorded last night will be up there sometime this afternoon. But we do a monthly webinar, and they are pay what you can. So there's always a free ticket and then a donation ticket available. But some really exciting upcoming webinars that we have is working with students in their school gardens, the idea of green gentrification and what that means, and then also that child-friendly plant guide are some of our upcoming webinars. And all of those are listed on our website. Right now, I only have through next month. So this working as students in the school garden is the only thing that's listed up there, because I'm finalizing our spring lineup. We take December off, and I'll touch on why we do that in just a second. But the spring is 99% finalized, so I'll be putting that up in the next week probably. And so keep an eye out about when those dates are going to be. So the reason we don't have a webinar in December is because we have our big in-person summit every December. And so this year is going to be at the Fort Worth Botanic Garden and Botanical Research Institute of Texas. It's going to be December 2 and 3. And we have some really exciting keynote speakers. They're going to be Lisa Carlson, who's the immediate past president of the American Public Health Association. She has had quite the 2 years of being in charge of the American Public Health Association. Through all of our conversations with her over this last year of getting ready for our summit, she's really shared that the #1 thing she's learned has been how equitable access to nature is so crucial to how families have weathered this pandemic, both their mental and their physical health. And so that has really become a passion project for her over her 2 years of being in charge of the American Public Health Association. And then our other speaker is Angela Hanscom. She is an occupational therapist specializing in pediatrics. And she works primarily with kids that have some sort of developmental disorder. And she really works with them on taking them out in nature and doing things like climbing trees, playing in streams, and how that is impacting their muscular skeletal growth and also their development in terms of their mental growth as well, and how important all of that is. And lastly, we will have a group panel on equity in the outdoors. Our panelists for this are really exciting. They're going to be David Buggs, who's with Texas Parks and Wildlife, Rocio Villalobos, who's with this equity office in the city of Austin, Jaime Gonzalez, who's with the Nature Conservancy, Melinda Chow, who's with Austin Youth River Watch, and then Alex Bailey, who's the founder of Black Outside. And they're going to be talking about how important equity is in the outdoor space and how important it is to create welcoming experiences for everyone. So now you may be wondering, well, this is great, but how can I get involved and what can I do? So there are a couple ways that you can get involved. The first is to join a regional collaborative. If you are in any of our regions and you would like to join that regional collaborative, please let me know. I'm happy to add you to our regional collaborative list. Happy to share your information with our regional leaders, get you involved in a meeting. Also, all of those strategic areas that I talked about earlier, they all have a monthly call where we are working to advance things like creating that health document, creating these webinars. All of that comes through our strategic call groups, and they are a huge help to our work that we do as TCINN. So if you're interested in joining any of those calls, you can just let me know. I can get you in those lists. And lastly, you can become a partner of Texas Children in Nature Network. There's no fee to become a partner of our work. You can become a partner either as an individual or as an organization. So if your local chapter of the Native Plant Society wants to become an organizational partner, you are more than welcome to do that. And it's a great way to kind of get involved and hear everything that we have going on as an organization. So that is it. Thank you so much for listening. I'm gonna leave this up so you all can get my contact information. But I'm gonna look, I see that there's questions in the chat. Sorry, I haven't been able to watch them as I've been presenting. I'm gonna go through if I can answer.
Sarah, while you're looking through the chat, you mentioned Richard Liu's book, Last Child in the Woods. He also came out later with another book called The Nature Principle, Reconnecting with Life in a Virtual Age.
Yes.
And he talks about nature deficit disorder for adults. And he says, living, reconnecting with life in a virtual age. Well, that's been us for the last year or so with the storm and the pandemic. I mean, it's like, I remember not long ago, Carter Smith issued a letter saying Texans are ready to get out in the parks and stuff after the lockdown and stuff, so it's not just for kids. I guess my point is it's really important for kids, but I think it's also important for us adults too.
It is very important. And actually our webinar last night, our psychiatrist that we talked to was really talking about not just what you can do with your kids, but how you as an adult are positively impacted by even spending 20 minutes a day outside, and how important that is.
Yeah. I have one other question while you're looking at the screens. I know in the past, I've talked to some adults. I've been out at Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in the little house there. It was a part of your screen show. They're working with kids, and I know there's some adults that maybe are kind of hesitant to work with kids. They don't feel qualified, or they're afraid, or whatever. But I mean, how would you address their fears? And it looks like too that from some of your presentation, there are opportunities for adults to help that don't necessarily involve one-on-one or teaching children or working with them, like planting the garden at one of the schools or something, or maintaining the garden. So can you address some of those opportunities for adults that may be a little hesitant to work with children?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, just because you might be a little hesitant to maybe work with a first or second grader, there are definitely high school and college students who might be really excited to work with you. And that is a whole different experience. And so maybe if you're a little concerned about working with younger kids, try out a different age. But I will say for myself, I thought when I first started in this career, I thought older kids were where my heart was. And then I met my first group of first graders and I was like, oh, you all are precious and amazing. And so I would say just be willing to try it out and talk to any group who you might be interested in volunteering with and just shadow. You can take a time, like you don't have to jump in there the very first time and teach. You can ask, hey, can I just come and watch a program and see if that's something that might be of interest to you? And then, you can say like, hey, this was great, but maybe not. And that's totally cool too. You don't have to say when you're going to shadow, you don't have to commit to volunteering. Volunteering, I was a volunteer coordinator for years, and I always told them, I was like, it's a two-way street. It's like, I'm checking you out to see if I want you to be my volunteer, but you're also checking us out as an organization. And if you tell me, no, I don't think this is the right organization for me, that's totally fine, because it's, you kind of have to match. And so I would just tell you to try it out. And the little kids will think you're amazing no matter what. They're going to think that you are the coolest person they have ever met because you know about bees, or you know about this flower. So you don't have to worry about them not liking you. They will. They'll be so, they're so excited they're on a field trip, they don't really care. And also, no matter what your level of knowledge is, like, you probably know more than a kindergartner, and so you will already know more than they do. And if you get that kindergartner that does know everything, because they are out there, I turn it around and I was like, oh, can you tell me about that? And they will be so excited that they get to tell an adult all of these things that they know.
Well, I know from my limited experience, I've had to learn more when I had to prepare something to show it to someone else. You know, and I'm kind of reminded by one of my mentors in the past, Craig Hensley, who was the interpretive ranger at Guadalupe State Park. And his motto or creed was making a difference one child at a time. And that is so important. But I'm going to stop it because I know there's a number of chats that are there that I think people have some questions that you want to respond to. So I'll be quiet.
Yeah. The first one I have up here is from Robert, saying some parents have concerns over bee stings. One in a group said she wanted all stones zero scape because her child was allergic to grass. How would you respond to that? One is first listen to the fears that parents have, and really try to figure out what's behind that. A lot of times what we're experiencing with families now is kind of what I alluded to a little bit ago. A lot of these parents weren't raised outside either. And so all of this is brand new to them. And so really take the time to explain to them about bees, or explain to them about the grasses. And don't do it in a patronizing way, but really listen to their concerns and tell them, hey, I hear what you're saying. This is the things that we've taken into consideration, that this is why we feel like this is a safe environment for your children. I think, especially for bees, a lot of people think all bees are yellow jackets, and they're automatically going to sting everyone. So really talking about like, hey, actually this is, a carpenter bee. They are really just very interested in this Esperanza. They don't even notice we're here, kind of letting them know about those things. I find it is really very helpful. We've got a quote. So glad to hear about your good work. Can you share some numbers with regards to numbers of children and families benefiting, and maybe percentage of target population reached so far? So I don't have any 2020 numbers, primarily because a lot of our partners just weren't tracking things in 2020. Either they had completely shut down programming, or they were doing everything virtually and hadn't figured out how they could really kind of see who was interacting with what they were offering. But I do know in 2019, our partners worked with over 4 million families across the state of Texas. I believe our numbers are going to go up when I do our end of 2021 survey. Our goal is that all of the families in Texas, which is 33 million, I think, will spend time outdoors every day. So I hope that answered your question. We do have within our Cities Connecting Children to Nature, we have about 23 green schoolyards that have been built so far. We're working on increasing that number. Olay, we've got 10 fully finished Olay sites, and we've got about 15 in construction right now. So those are going to make some big impressions. So How is the organization funded? That is a fantastic question. Because we are a nonprofit, we get a lot of funding from grants right now, but we also have our summit is one of our big fundraisers every year. And then also this year we have our Founders Circle that is available. And these are people that are interested in helping us get our start. And so it is an ask of $1,000 a year for our first 3 years. So giving that commitment for our first 3 years to really get us started. And we've had some fantastic founders that have come into play and are really helping with that. If anyone's interested in learning more about that, please let me know. I'm happy to talk to you about our Founders Circle. But yeah, we also have a donation button on our website. So I would love a donation, but you don't need to give one. But yeah, so that's how we're funded. Do we work with the Department of Education? Yes, we do. TCINN was founded by both Texas Education Association and TPWD. And then I also work with TEA. I work with several of the education service centers across the state, and I work with a lot of our ISDs across the state as well.
So I see a question about the recorded presentation available to NIPSOT members who are teachers. I think you mentioned YouTube earlier, right? Is that correct? This would be available, but we're also recording this as well. So I think.
Yeah, I don't have this recording. The Native Plant Society is recording it. So okay. I think they're planning on making it available. However, all of our webinars that we have done in the past are always available on our YouTube channel as well. And I'm happy also if you would like something like this for your school district or anything, please let me know. I'm happy to give this presentation again.
Okay, very good. Okay, yeah. Bill just noted this recording will be available to all registrants, so that's good. Okay. Well, go ahead.
We've got one more question from Helen. Do we have any evaluation tools for teachers to use to demonstrate the value for our students of time spent in nature, especially with outdoor science field trips? It's a great question, Helen. One of the things that our education subgroup is working on right now is actually a 2-pager for administrators that show the benefit of time spent outdoors and time spent in nature. And so we are working on that right now and plan to make that available for any teacher, especially in Texas, but really any teacher that is interested in that information. We also, on our website, if you click on resources, there's a research tab, and it has lots of scientific studies available in that. In terms of individual evaluation that you can take with your students, I don't have anything right now. However, there is a really interesting study that I think is on our website. If it's not, it's because I'm trying to remember. I was talking, it's someone's dissertation, and so they may not have had it available to give to me to put on the website. But Sky Ranch did a really interesting study a couple years ago where they took kids from a school where half of the students spent the 5 days prior to their STAR test out at Sky Ranch reviewing, and the other half of the school did all of their review at the school. And they saw a 20% increase in those test scores for the kids that were out at Sky Ranch the 5 days prior to taking their STAR test.
Wow.
Great. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well, unless there's any other questions, Sarah, thank you so much for this presentation. I think the work that you're doing in the organization and the scope is absolutely essential in today's environment for youngsters to get outdoors, to experience nature. They're exploring their, minds and they're developing, and being exposed to nature is a critical part of that development, I think. So thank you very much for your presentation this morning.
Thank you all. I'm going to put my email in the chat as well, so please feel free to email me if you have any questions.